Welcome, everyone. Today is day 29. This is Gunita here from the 1947 Partition Archive, and this is another episode of 75 Days of Partition. As you know, we are running this series for 75 days, starting June 3rd, when the Mountbatten Partition Plan was announced, going through the 17th of August, when the Radcliffe Line was publicly announced. And so today I've got here Dr. Snober Satarvala with me. And she, welcome, Dr. Satarvala. So I'm just gonna do a little introduction for the audience of who you are. So Dr. Satarvala is head of the Department of English at St. Mira's College for Girls, which was founded by the Sindhi minority community in Pune. So very much connected to partition there, even in its founding story. So Dr. Satarvala's research focuses on oral history and memory studies focused on the Parsi community. In 2019, she and her students collaborated with the LaGuardia Community College in New York to read literature of partition together. It's a very unique collaboration across multiple countries. A total of 90 students participated from Pune, from Lahore, Dhaka, and New York to read partition literature and analyze it together, which is so fascinating. In 2020, through the Tata Trust's Partition Archive research grants that we helped administer, she explored the safe passage and shelter during partition via oral history. So welcome, Dr. Satarvala. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Gunita, for having me, and thank you to the Partition Archives for everything. Thank you, and thank you to Tata Trust. Yes.
Of course, it's our pleasure. Yeah, and thank you to Tata Trust from our end as well, to help facilitate such fascinating research. So let me start out by asking you, what is your connect to oral history, and what got you into wanting to research the Parsi community through oral history? There's always a personal connect, so I'd love to explore that for a minute.
So I'm going to first begin with the Parsi community and partition, because Parsis are such a small minority that we're almost on the brink of extinction. I could be one of the last, Parsis who are pure-blooded Parsis. And my husband's father, Lieutenant General Satarvala, he was part of the Gurkha regiment, the 5th Gurkha regiment. And, family legends and stories that you tell. And my husband always told me about how this giant mountain of a father, he was almost over 6 feet tall. A lieutenant general took his young son to watch the movie Gandhi, and he wept like a baby. My mother-in-law told me that because he was a Parsi and a neutral minority, he and his Gurkhas were assigned one of those trains from Pakistan. And they actually made it safely. That's why my husband is my husband. But I was talking to another family friend and telling her about this. And she said the stories go that the Parsi engine drivers, there were a lot of Parsis in the railways. And they were asked to, drive these trains across, the border because they were neutral. But they would wear their white sadras, which is their inner religious vest. And so people would know that they were Parsis and that they were not Hindu or Muslim. So that got me thinking and, got me fascinated. What did the minorities do? In all these narratives of hate that we, generate out of this whole partition, what about the little narratives of hope, of how people tried to do something, especially because they were neutral minorities? What did they do? So that made me think about the Anglo-Indians, the Jews, the Christians. So that's my personal sort of family take on this. Gunita.
And what are some of the findings that you've had, and have they differed by community? But I guess let's explore first, what are some of the sort of big picture findings from your research on how minorities dealt with partition and how they supported or what roles they played?
So another part of my research, for which I got a grant from the Indian Council of Social Science Research, was on how will the Parsis be remembered. And I presented that at Cambridge. And the paper will be published and it will be out. It's a London journal, the South Asian Research Studies Journal, in February. And another thing that's always bothered me is representation. How are people portrayed, especially the minorities? And in the Parsis, it's even more problematic because in like by the end of the century, there might not be any pure-blooded Parsis to sort of oppose, the representation. And then what happens is the stereotype, sort of the tyranny of the stereotype will persist. So that kind of bothered me. And then in this collaboration that we were doing together, and let me tell you, it was scary because we didn't know what would happen. There is a history of anger, and would we be able to negotiate that between these students? We didn't know them, and there was still so much anger between India and Pakistan, and so much anger between Bangladesh and Pakistan, and there were potentially explosive moments. There were moments where, somebody would say something and then we'd all have to sort of, step in and, negotiate it. But we did. And it was beautiful. And we formed lasting friendships. I get regular yearly messages from kids in Pakistan and Bangladesh. So we were studying Cracking India by Bapsi Sidhwa. She's a Pakistani Parsi. And in that story, the protagonist, the heroine, is a little girl. And the little girl is terrified because her mother and her aunt, they're smuggling gasoline. And she starts beginning to imagine or suspect that they're the ones, right, who are setting Lahore on fire. She finds out later on that actually the gasoline is being smuggled to help refugees, particularly abandoned women or abused women, to escape across the border back to India. And I knew that there were autobiographical elements to the story. So I started wondering, like, did this really happen? What did other people do? Did people, do things like that? I mean, I've got my family story, and then we've got the stories about the engine drivers and sadras. What about the other stuff, What did people do? And I want to say that when I did my ICSSR research project, it was a jungle. I was fending for myself. Whereas when I did the research project with the archives, I felt like a princess because y'all were amazing. I mean, I felt royal.
Y'all curated. We were able to put you on a throne.
Yes. And you curated based on my keywords, such wonderful oral histories. And for 30 days, they were the most beautiful days because I would get up so excited. Like, what am I going to hear today?
Oh, and of course, so cool. That's all thanks to Karen on our team.
Amazing people. Anchal is wonderful. And then I would cry. Then I would go down and I would tell the story. My neighbors would be waiting. Which story did you hear today? And I tell them, oh my God, this is the one I heard. So I'll tell you a few of them. Is that what you would like me to do? Tell you some of the stories?
Yeah, for sure. And, I wanted to quickly mention that Bapsi Sidhwa's story is in the Partition archive. In 2012, we had an exhibition and she was actually our guest speaker. So she flew out we had that exhibition in Berkeley. She flew out to Berkeley and spoke at our events. And we had a very long interview with her, several hours long. So anyway.
You jumped the gun. I was just going to say that the best part is that after studying Bapsi Sidhwa and teaching it, I heard her. Thanks to the archive.
It's fascinating, wasn't it? It was, yeah.
And it's true. That's the best part. Everything that I was wondering about, it was true. So she really did. Her mother and her aunt actually did this stuff, and they did so much more. Then there was another Parsi family that kept so many things for people, and they kept them, and they came back, 20 years later, not really looking for their things, but looking for connections. There was another story that fascinated me, which was this Jewish guy. He was in the Air Force, and they would go on sorties at night to see where the fires were burning. And then they would tell people on the ground, and they would go to those villages to protect people and help them, leave. Then I put down some of them, the rehabilitation centers. Then there was this Anglo-Indian truck driver, who kind of, yeah. And he just took people across the border to help them reach safely. There was that, look at this. There was a gentleman in Lahore, and his neighbors were Christians from Madras, from Chennai. All right. Wow. What were the chances? A Christian from Chennai in Lahore protects him because they had like a government post, they had a car, so they could drive him to safety. There were, so many wonderful, hopeful stories that, for me, it gave me so much to take to class. I could go on and on about stories.
Please,
one person I was,
we'd love to know more. What other stories did you find that you'd like to share?
Then there was this one lady. She was beautiful, even in the video. And I think she was in Balochistan, and she was protected by again a Christian. And then taken to a refugee camp and flown out. So the first reaction is like, you think, oh, wow, flown out, she's privileged. And she explained that no, the aircrafts, they took out everything. They ripped out everything from inside the aircraft. So it was just a shell. Yeah, and they on the floor in the aircraft, and that's how they were airlifted to safety. Then the cantonments were safe areas. There was a nun.
This is in Balochistan, in Quetta?
Yes. And then there was another nun who talked about how, because they were in the cantonment, which was relatively sheltered, they were able to take care of their staff. It was just wonderful. The role of the radio, we forget about that, the role of the radio in giving people hope, in motivating people. I found the most interesting stories because that's what I didn't know. But the stories from Pakistan, Parsis in Pakistan, or people in Pakistan, because we like to think we're better than other people, and it's nice to know that you're not. It's nice to know that, and the things that women did for women in Pakistan. Another thing that fascinated me was the stories in Hyderabad. There are Parsis in Hyderabad. There are Nawab Parsis in Hyderabad. Hyderabad as a state. Yeah. And Hyderabad as a state, and how, the use of language to sort of cover up what is an invasion. So in a sense that as well. And the Parsis as elite people, we are privileged elite people, but not despite being neutral, not being uninvolved. We were involved in our own way. And so that was that. I felt it's important to acknowledge these things, because what happens is that the grand narrative overpowers these, and these get erased. And then they get replaced by other things like, you're not Indian, you're from somewhere else,
Yeah,
which,
absolutely. Which is why
yeah,
it's so important to preserve these past narratives so that, they don't, this vacuum in knowledge, if you don't preserve that knowledge, gets filled by whatever political forces want to fill, whatever in there, or ideological forces.
yeah.
So you're absolutely right about that. And what are some of your conclusions that you've come to from listening to all these absolutely fascinating stories?
Before I say that, I want to acknowledge the Anglo-Indians because they're another community. That tends to be erased, because they also sort of become in-betweens. And despite that, despite being othered, they also played a very significant role in their own small way, of whether it be through education, and so many educational spaces became spaces of protection and safety as well. So what were my findings? My findings were that so I will say positive things. There was great sadness. I said I'd say positive things, but I will talk about sadness. That something like this happened, and all the people felt that it need not have happened, but it was mismanaged. It was provoked in terrible ways, but for me, this experience with the archives was the most hopeful thing I've had, because sometimes we feel the world is becoming so right wing and so intolerant, and in these stories, I found hope. I found greatness of human spirit. I felt inspired every single day. I could go back to my class renewed, revived, with so much to share with them, that hopefully they use as beacons in their life rather than looking at darkness, the light of these people. And yeah, I'm teaching one of those stories. It's called Rabaya Appa. It's by Ashraf Siddiqui, who's a Bangladeshi writer, and it's about a woman who sacrifices everything, for not just love of a man, but love of her country. In all these clashes, the husband dies, the child dies. At the end, but her spirit is not destroyed, and she's a teacher. And she says, I want to teach people to be human beings. We have to ask ourselves, right? What does it mean to be a human being? And I think I learned a lot of that from the archives, the greatness of being a human being and to be proud to be one, which is sometimes a little hard, with the stuff that's going on right now. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, for this exploration. And there are so many stories in the archive, more than 10,000. Even though we deal with them every day, I have not dealt with the stories that you've come across. So that's the beauty of it. It's become too large for anyone, really. And yeah, these are really fascinating insights that you bring in from your own unique Parsi background as well. So I really thank you for coming on our show today. We're pretty much out of time now. Are there any other final words or suggestions that you have for our audience and what they can do to learn more about the Parsi community and the Parsi experience and the Anglo-Indian experience?
My first suggestion is that please do not look at Bollywood stereotypes of Parsis. We are not ancient people who spend the whole time polishing our cars. Yes, we do like our old cars, but that's not what we're about. There's some of the we have great great freedom fighters in India. Bairam Malabari, people they don't know about. him. Of course, Naroji. Then you have, of course, so many of them. And of course, when I start getting nervous, then all the names disappear from my head. We have great scientists, great musicians. We have Freddie Mercury. We have Homi Baba. We have the Tatas, they're Parsis.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. They've done so much, for India and South Asia.
remember that about the Parsis, not the Bollywood stereotypes. And I would say that about the Anglo-Indians as well. They're not just people, some of the greatest writers, they're just not people who danced as background dancers in Bollywood again, So look for, with respect and acknowledgement and celebration of difference, and disinherit, don't not acknowledge, but disinherit these old stories of violence. It's done. We need to move on. That's what I'd like to say.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful closing note. And I'd like to remind our audience that we're doing this every day till August 17th. So please join us again tomorrow, every day except Sundays. So Sundays we do take a break. But for now, goodbye, and I'll see everybody